We're thrilled to just have David and Anjali, our rock star presenters, just giving us this amazing training today. And we're just so excited to bring this webinar to you. The Just-in-Time Training Network is providing this free live webinar as an example of what we have to offer through our training network. If your agency is not a part of the network and would like to find out more, contact us at jitsupport@usf.edu, or you can go to our website and check out jittrainingnetwork.org and click on Learn More, and we have a Contact Us feature there as well. So we'd love to have more agencies across this nation join the network and provide this quality training to caregivers. So with that, we have a great topic and wonderful presenters. I'm going to turn it over to David and Anjali.
Hey, thanks, Laura. Appreciate being here. Excited, Miss Anjali.
Yeah.
Talk about one of our favorite things, or no, definitely your favorite thing.
Definitely my favorite thing. Good to see some familiar faces on the screen too. I guess names because we can't see your faces, but good to see some familiar folks.
All the Miami peeps.
Yeah, some of our Miami folks. Cool to have people from across the country on here today too. So we're grateful that you guys took the time to join us today.
Yeah. Excited to be back with Just in Time, Miss Laura Diaz. It's good to roll with her again for some trainings. And I know we're excited to get into this, right? It's our parents' guide to navigating challenging behaviors. And very quickly, so Family Initiative is an organization Anjali and I lead. It's based in South Florida, and we work with children diagnosed in the autism spectrum and children engaged by the child welfare system. So for folks that come from that universe and that background, I know today will be a really, I think, applicable conversation for families. I know we're excited to get started, Miss Ange. Ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it.
Why are we talking about behavior today? Really, for lots of reasons, but I think primarily the most common problem parents report is their child's behavior. And that's regardless of the age of their child, whether it is a biological child, a child who's placed in their home, adoptive child, their neighbors, their students, kids you saw at the grocery store. Behavior are an issue, I think, across the board. And what most folks do is rely either on what has been done with them, so what their own parents did when they were growing up, or we rely on the folks we know, so our friends, our family, some other folks in our lives to kind of talk about what should we do to help manage the behavior. So
well, I just think too, even think about social media, right? So, and there's so many parenting groups, parenting newsletters, websites, right? So you could tell, I think clearly, one, there's a lot of folks that are looking for information, right? So it's kind of driving that demand, and there's a lot of different outlets available, right, to try to get that information. So I think it's reflective for, all of us, right, about parenting's tough.
Yeah.
And I think folks are always trying to figure out, a better way forward, right, in raising their children. And I think Anjali said, I think sometimes the struggle we have, some of us, is that we lean on our own history, right, of what we experienced as kids with our moms and dads. And that can be a good thing. And sometimes it's not such a great thing, right, when we do that. And so I think always for us in relationship to these kinds of conversations, why I think they're popular and always a challenging thing, raising children.
You referred to social media, and immediately I thought of TikTok, even though I no longer get on TikTok because it will automatically remove like 3 hours of my life I get on there. But there's so many things on there I think we see on social media that some have some validity, but some don't. And I think the other thing paired with that is what I'm learning in my age now is our kids are much more socially savvy and much more technology savvy than we are. So they're already 2 steps ahead typically. So makes it challenging too. They've already seen those videos and know what to do about it. So so I absolutely agree that it's a challenge, I think, across the board. So
yep. And the TikTok dances. That's all I know my house. Little people got the TikTok dances going. I was trying to show me what the one that shake their arms anyway. So my girls were doing it for me yesterday. I try to keep up with that.
So what has worked for us and worked for you as we're growing up? So I think for growing up, your middle name. So the sole purpose of a child's middle name so they can tell when they're in trouble. I was telling Dave earlier, I was lucky. I don't have a middle name, so I did not experience this. So.
And the great news for me is I hate my middle name. So every time my mom would use my middle name, it was like, one, I knew I was in trouble and it was not going to be good. And two, it just irked me because I couldn't stand it. So it was like a double whammy for me when I got the full name in my house. So not a fan of that.
And I think it is funny because I know this is something that is common. We talk to folks, and I think most folks we talk to are like, "Yep, that was my life too." So you know that. So that's one of the ways I think some of us have been raised, right?
Or the spaghetti spoon. There's another one in my house that there was no meme for that. What is there, Miss Ange?
I had the flip flop.
You had to flip flop.
Yeah. Or the look. I had this one in my house. So the look I was also sharing as an adult. We'd sit around the table for dinner. We'd all go home and be home for the holiday or something like that. My mom just had to look across the table and all of us would like sit up and put our hands in our lap. I didn't know what we were doing, but we knew we were doing something. So I think for a lot of us growing up, that was another thing. Your mom just has to give you that look.
Yeah. Well, and I know for a lot of folks, and I know for me, I think if you're of a certain kind of generation, Miss Ange, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kids were to be seen and not heard, right? In our family. And so, if we were getting a little too rambunctious or something was going on that, we shouldn't have been doing, it just took a look, right? And I know particularly my grandmother, who's kind of like the matriarch of our family. She gave you even just like a fleeting look, just out of respect for her and our family. That was it. You were done and we were quiet. So look was powerful.
I agree. Can I tell you what's funny as you're talking about this? Like, one of the things when my mom looked at is we'd always like hunch over. So she was like, sit up straight. So you're even talking about it. I'm doing it right now. How deep it is in my history there. So, but I do think a lot of these things work because of the history and relationship we have. And over time, we learn those things. So we know with the families we work with, sometimes you don't have kids in your home as long, or there's not that shared history, or they're coming to you when they're older and have a different history. So really, think finding what works for you in your home too is what we want to talk about today.
Yep. And I think it's good context for folks that are here, because I'm sure some of what we're talking about right now resonates with people that are in the training, right? So that history of when we were all younger and when we were growing up, what that was like. And I think that's why sometimes today we struggle, because in contrast, are those strategies that we experienced effective today in relationship to the parenting that we're doing, right? And so when we go to some of those strategies and they're pretty futile, I think that's where the frustration struggle begins, right? So it's like, if I'm going through my toolbox and nothing really seems to be working, or at least working in kind of a long term, right? Because there is a tendency, I feel like sometimes we day trade in parenting. So we do some things sometimes just today to get through today, but it's definitely not setting us up to be successful tomorrow and moving forward, right? So I feel like, again, why we like to talk a lot about this is because the struggle is real in relationship to all this. All right. So why do my kids act out, right? So I think there's lots of different reasons that the children and the families we work with, right, particularly, might struggle. And I know a lot of the kids that we work with, they can have a tough time. And so I think first and foremost, the message that we want to convey today, and I know sometimes these things are easier said than done, right? And for us, I think remaining mindful and vigilant in every moment, because there's some moments where my capacity is pretty diminished. And so, if my kids are having a tough time and I'm not, 100% operating, it is tough to do this. But I do think the thing to remember is, their kids are having a hard time. They're not giving us a hard time, right? So if our kids in our home are struggling, we need to, I think, honor and respect the fact that they're trying to work through something, that they've got some big thoughts and big feelings inside of them. And they don't really have a good, appropriate way to share that with us. And so, a lot of that leads to a lot of the struggles we have. And so, I just think extending our guys some grace, the children that we work with and children that we serve, and understanding that there's a lot of times good reason in their history why they struggle. A lot of their history can be a catalyst for some tough behavior. And we'll get into, today and some opportunities moving forward, right, of some strategies of how we can, engage, I think, in a way that, again, not in the day trading part, but it's sort of the investment in the long-term strategies that really do kind of bend that arc back to a place where we feel better about it in parenting, and really set our young people up to be successful. And we had a professor a long time ago used to say to Anjali and I all the time, remember, the brain's part of the body. And so I think too often for us, if someone has diabetes and their pancreas, and their body's not functioning properly, right? And we give a lot of empathy to that. We understand that. And that makes a lot of sense to us. But if we have somebody and they have a traumatic history and their brain is regularly releasing cortisol through their body and their parasympathetic nervous system is not kicking in, right, the way that we'd want it to kind of put the brakes on a lot of the anxiety that they have, again, that's a chemical issue that they have going on in their brain, and they're struggling and trying to work through all that. So again, I think there's a lot of catalysts for why our kids act out, and trying to communicate how they're feeling to us and trying to work through some stuff. But I think those are all insights. I don't know, we talk a lot about and try to be vigilant and mindful of as we do our work every day in parenting.
And I think what we want to do over the rest of the time we have today and over the course of the next few months, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well as we go through this, is really give you all and folks who are watching this an idea of why it might happen. So like they said, an understanding, because when we understand and kind of view it through that lens, then I think it makes it easier for us to be able to manage and address the behavior. I know a lot of times when we're in a moment with a child, it's hard because it feels very personal sometimes, particularly like you said, when that child is dysregulated and has all those chemicals coursing through their bodies, and that sets us off, and then we're giving it back to them. And so it turns into this dynamic that's really challenging to calm and move forward from. So hopefully with the knowledge, there becomes more understanding of why some of these things are happening. And it still might feel a little bit personal, but taking a step back and be like, all right, I remember this is what's going on. Yeah. What can I do to minimize that impact and to keep moving forward with the behavior in a healthy way?
Yeah. And I think that focus and the mantra in my head is, they're not being willfully disobedient. They're trying to meet a need, right? Yeah. So as the big person, as the boss, right, in charge, how do I help facilitate a way for them to meet the need, right? And use that as a way forward.
Yeah. I got to say, when I learned that phrase, when you shared that with me, it was very pivotal in terms of me understanding behavior, honestly, because I think even being a behavior analyst for many years and looking at the behavior and knowing it's not a willful thing, it still
feels that way. Yeah,
it can feel that way. But I think when you shift that frame of reference, be like, oh, that's right. They're trying to meet a need here. What is the need that's happening? It helps us take a step back and be like, all right. I'm the grown up here. I got to figure out what this need is. And this goes for everyone, honestly. This isn't just for little kids. This is big kids, adults, anyone, honestly, why those behaviors are occurring.
All right, good stuff, Ms. Ange. Good stuff. All right, folks. Ange, you ready for this? Put your seatbelts on. Anjali's ready to take off for the applied behavior analysis. Here we go.
I'll try not to.
All right.
I'll try to get through the rest of the slides today. So there are different approaches to understanding behavior and how we address those behaviors. So like I said, over the course of the upcoming months, we're going to do a deeper dive into each of these areas to be able to understand from each perspective, how are we really looking at those behaviors and why they're occurring? What are they communicating? And then what do we do about it? So very specific to those different ways that we're looking at the behavior. And these are all evidence-based approaches. These are all approaches we use in our shop in different ways. And I think each of them bring a lot of value in terms of how to address the behavior. The big thing I think is for us, the more, again, going back to the more knowledge that we're able to provide to you, the more helpful it'll be in assessing what's happening for the child in your home. Because sometimes there's one way that is the way that's going to be most effective in that moment. But there's also other ways that you're like, I didn't even think about it this way. Maybe I need to address it that way. So again, opening the door to different options to be able to deal with the behavior, because I also do think sometimes we get into, just like we were talking about earlier, what we know has worked for us or what we fall back on, because it's what we do. And even though we're like, oh yeah, I read this book, I saw this TikTok video, in the moment we go to what we know, especially if we're feeling a little bit dysregulated or don't know how to manage that behavior in the moment. So again, giving a little bit more information today, but then moving forward, going deeper dive into each of these and really digging in on what does it mean and how do we address it. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I will try to keep it brief. But this is really looking at why behaviors occur based on what's happening in their environment. So when we're talking about things from applied behavior analysis, and so this is primarily used as an intervention for kids on the autism spectrum. If you ask me, it's effective for everybody. So because I think we all live in an environment and we all have things surrounding our behavior. So good and bad behaviors, right? So what is happening in the environment that kind of shapes that behavior? So what's reinforced? So when kids act out, then what do we do? And does that make that behavior continue to happen more in the future, or does that make it happen less in the future? I always think like an easy example for anyone who has littles in their house, when kids like the little, right when they're learning to speak or around that age when they say something that might not be appropriate unexpectedly and the adults laugh, well, all of a sudden, that's all we're hearing because we're responding to that. And the kids are like, oh, that got a lot of people laughing. That's entertaining. I'm going to keep doing that behavior. So I think things like that, what we talk about in applied behavior analysis is really looking at, like we're saying, what's happening before that behavior that might be triggering that behavior to occur. And then what's happening after that behavior that's causing it to continue. So are people laughing? Are we getting our way? We'll go into... I'm going to try to do the whole thing right now. I'm going to try not to. And really through those repeated opportunities, that's how we learn behavior. And again, this can be good or not good. So that's a lot of the way we learn language too, is through what we're hearing and what's reinforced. It's how we learn appropriate behaviors too, is what we're reinforcing and what we're doing over and over again. So when we have that learned behavior, changing those things can be a little bit challenging because the longer we've been doing those behaviors, the deeper that connection is between those things surrounding it and the behavior. So, but there's absolutely ways, I think, using the applied behavior analysis or ABA approach that we can change behaviors. With ABA, it's pretty specific in terms of looking at the specific behaviors, why they're occurring, and then what do we do about those particular behaviors. So it is a very individualized approach. Typically, there's some basic principles that we'll go over when we get to that topic about how to really use those specific principles with the kids in your home.
So not only is this good for parenting children, Anjali, but for the wives on, you can get your husband to consistently take the trash out, right? There's all kinds of things that ABA can be very useful for, right? And in any home environment.
It is. And the base thing about ABA is, I wasn't going to say anything about, but it really is all behaviors, right? The things that we like, we really want to catch our kids doing the right thing and celebrate that. And this is across the board, honestly, but I think this is one of the foundation principles of ABA is a lot of times what we do is we tend to overlook it when kids are doing well. So if they're acting out, we're on it. We're very quick to be there and correct that behavior by telling them to stop doing it or telling them what else they should be doing. But when kids are quiet and getting along and doing what they're supposed to, we aren't as good at talking about that and praising them for that. And it's no fault of anyone. I think we're all dealing with what's in front of us and trying to manage. So I think recognizing that part of it is huge. And I think the other thing with this is understanding that these things are going to take time also. So particularly with the things we're doing with ABA, sometimes we see things kind of get a little bit worse before they get better, but that's all right, because if we are doing things in a particular way, and we've always done things a particular way, and then I'm pushing back and you're not getting that same response that you've been used to getting historically, you're going to be like, what is happening right now? I'm going to try harder because this has always worked. Why isn't it working today? So I'm going to keep trying harder. I'm going to keep trying harder. I'm going to keep trying harder. And I'm like, ugh. And then I'm going to try other things potentially to be like, all right, I know this has worked for the last 10 years of my life. Why isn't it working? I'm going to say, maybe if I act out this way or push it a little harder this way, I'll get my way. So understanding that also, and I just said, I'll get my way. But again, I go back to what I was saying. It's not the willful disobedience, even though it feels like that. It's meeting that need. So when our kids are acting in a way we don't like, they are getting their needs met the best way that they know how or what has worked for them in the past. So really when we look at it from an ABA lens, we talk about all those things.
Way to go. Good job. I can feel the self-restraint right there.
I know.
Good job.
If you have questions, email me later.
I love it. So in the recognition of, each child's unique,
Yeah.
right? And every family's unique. Obviously today we're advocating on behalf of really an eclectic way to look at this, right? And approach to parenting. And so I know for me, a very eye-opening component of us and parenting and understanding, again, how to meet the needs of our kids is understanding the value and the benefits of occupational therapy. And so, for a lot of the kids that we work with, and I know Andrew and I talk about this a lot as a traveler on the state, I'd probably say the last 3 or 4 years here in the state of Florida, we've seen a dramatic increase of when we get the comprehensive behavioral health assessments for the clients we serve of a sensory processing disorder diagnosis, right? So 5, 6 years ago, barely ever saw that. And then all of a sudden recently, you see that in a litany of different diagnoses that come across our desks, right? So I think it's good for all of us to understand that parenting, as we get out there and there's more and more clinicians, kind of understanding the significance of the value of OT and beginning to understand our kids in relationship to their body and the environment, and a lot of those things being catalysts and drivers for meltdowns. And so we understand, and Ange sort of alluded to this in a different way about the environment. I think in an OT way, whether it's I'm in a room and it's really loud, that noise can be triggering for me, right? The sound can be really challenging. If things are busy, really busy visually, again, another thing that can be a triggering event for our kids. And I know a lot of the guys that we work with, the sensory seeking, right? So they're looking for input into their body, right? Or they're averse to that input, right? So whether they're hyper or hypo, right? So we're seeing a lot of this, and all of these experiences physiologically in their body lead to dysregulation, right? And so through utilizing OT and really understanding the nature and the uniqueness of each person, each kid. I know my youngest daughter has a very particular way that she has to have her socks on. If the seam on the socks is not perfectly straight across her toes, she'll yank the sock off really quickly and then put it back on again so she gets just right? So I think all of us have these little piccalillis, right, about our bodies, the way we experience the world. We want things to feel just right. And if they don't, then we tend to struggle with that, right? And so for a lot of the young folks and the children that we work with, how they express that struggle in relationship to what they're experiencing physiologically can be tough for us as parents. And I got to be candid. I think for me particularly, I'm a social worker. And this is, occupational therapy was not my jam. This was not something that I was well versed in. To know that there can be something in the environment that's triggering as a catalyst for why my child's struggling, that might not be the first thing on my radar, right? I might not be thinking about that. And so, again, that's why I think really leaning on the expertise of clinicians in the community and working with agencies that you're partnering with to have an OT lean into that situation, sometimes can be the unlock. And I know a couple of the kids that we worked with, God bless the behavior analysts that work with them. We are working, struggling, trying to make a lot of progress. And then we'll integrate the OT into that and watch our guys turn into a marshmallow, right? So all of a sudden, just because we have the right intervention for the right situation, makes all the difference in the world. So that multidisciplinary approach, and drawing from a lot of different models, essential, we feel like, for success in parenting and in finding ways to really ensure that we're allowing our kids to be successful, so they don't struggle behaviorally.
And I just think thinking about it from a lens we don't usually think about. So obviously I think about everything as a behavior, like what's the behavior? But understanding it might be a sensory need. I always think one of the early trainings we did, one of the caregivers had 2 boys in her home, middle school age boys, and was basically talking about how they had such a hard time in school. So she's like, they're fine at home, they'd be fine in the morning, but they'd get into school and they just could not keep it together. They couldn't sit still. They were class clowns. They're acting out. They're getting in trouble. We're worried they were going to get kicked out of school. And she'd only had placement of them for a few months, I think. And so we went through and kind of talked about this from an occupational therapy. And again, willful disobedience, unmet need. My brain is like, oh, what are they doing? Why are they acting out? They don't want to be in the classroom. They don't want to learn that. They're trying to escape that environment. So, but we talked through it, looked at this from this approach, and really what she shared with us was sensory wise, they weren't getting their needs met. They literally, their bodies could not sit still and concentrate. So what she started to do was in the morning before the bus came, she'd have them outside. She's like, we climb trees, we ride bikes, we run around. She's like, I know that's not a normal thing to do in the morning, but it's part of our morning routine. But because they were getting that big input into their body and into their muscles, she's like, it was transformational for our kids. It really shifted their ability to engage and like be present in class and learn. So I think sometimes viewing it through another lens, just knowing like, I didn't even think about that. That might be it. So instead of being like, oh, my child's throwing his food because he just doesn't like what I cook. Maybe it's something about the smell or the texture or how it feels in their mouth or something like that that might be contributing to it as well.
Yeah. And I always think in the end, as a mom or a dad, I think sometimes the inadequacy we feel of we're not able to meet the need, right? Mm-hmm. And we're struggling trying to figure out what that unlock is. And then, you think about something like this, about the sensory system. And all this time, there was really not a whole lot of mom or dad could do, right? If you didn't have that lens, to really help kind of make that happen. You can see why you'd struggle. So, when you know more, you can do better, right? With all of this. So that's the OT part, and we're always a huge advocate of that. We got an awesome OT team, and they'll be participating in this too as we move along, right? And to answer the last one, TBRI, right? So trust-based relational intervention. So we are big fans of that. Andrew and I are both practitioners of TBRI. And so, a lot of what we talk about in relationship to parenting is about attachment and connection. And I'm a big fan of relationships. I feel like all things happen in relationships, right? So in this approach is understanding our own history, and maybe some of the struggles we have in parenting come from our own history, our own experiences, and kind of dictate sometimes how we show up in particular moments. And I think about being mindful and present in the moment and realizing that my child is not giving me a hard time, right? They're having a hard time. And as a dad, how do I show up for that? Is key. And so the other part, which Andre alluded to, we talked about ABA, is that when we show up always in correcting, in an ABA lens, right, we're reinforcing sometimes bad behavior because the only time we're giving attention to kids is when we're correcting, right? And so through TBRI, in thinking about that, what we want to do is be very conscientious about showing up, like Anjali said, when things are going well. And so when we're positively engaging with our kids when things are going well, and I know sometimes the struggle is how often are things going well in some homes, right? So that's a real thing. But I do think sometimes even the mundane, basic things of life, when those things are happening and they're productive, to positively reinforce those things and give our kids kudos for that, because we begin to put investment in the relationship, or I would say to our staff, is currency in the bank, right? So I'm putting currency in the bank of that relationship. And by doing that, when things get hard, I have the ability to call upon that currency to help us get through a hard moment, right? So I just think it's basic human nature that the more you like somebody, the more likely you are to listen, right? And so that you feel safe, you feel trusted, you feel connected. And I think you're much more, open and willing to listen to guidance and direction from that person. So big fan of that piece. And always what we like about TBRI is it speaks also to those physiological needs and ecological needs. So for Anjali, that's a good mashup. I think it's got some ABA, some OT, a whole bunch of social work, all thrown into a pot and brought to a simmer, right? And so it's good for us, I think, in relationship for it's pliable, dynamic, and really can be customized and tailored to the individual needs of that family and that child. And so these are all things as we move along through the series of workshops, we will take deep dives into all this information to help moms and dads kind of get through all this stuff.
Absolutely. All right, here we go again. I'm back to my roots here.
Flexing.
So one of the things we want to make sure, regardless of which approach we're talking about, we need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So oftentimes when we're describing behaviors and talking about behaviors, we use vague terms that are hard to really hone in on and understand. So when we're talking about behavior, one of the first things we like to talk about is defining that behavior in a way that makes sense to everyone involved. Because if I don't know what we're talking about, I don't know how to address it. So we were talking earlier, like if there's a child that we're working with that's having a tough time, but I'm seeing it one way and Dave's seeing it another way. Well, we're not going to be able to change that because I'm like, oh yeah, he did great with that. And you're like, no, that's not what I was talking about, because we never went through this exercise of clearly defining what the behavior is in a way that's specific enough that we're on the same page. So when we're talking about behaviors, whether you're talking about with other caregivers in your home, whether you're talking about with the case manager, whether you're talking about it with your child's teacher or therapist or whoever it might be, I think we've got to make sure we know what we're talking about, because then we'll be able to address it in a way that makes sense. And that's fair, quite honestly, because for that child, if we just say whatever they're doing, I'm going to wait on this thing. If we're trying to correct a behavior, but I'm letting it go and Dave's cracking down on it, well, all of a sudden they're like, well, I want to hang out with her because she's soft and he's really tough. When really I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know that's what we were talking about. So, and it's not fair to that child to be inconsistent. And then we have different expectations when we should be on the same page about addressing that behavior. And I say, we're on the same page, but then I'm not following through with that in my actions. So when we're talking about behaviors, these three main things to think about when you're talking about what is a behavior. So first is that it's observable with those big eyes, right? So it is typically something you can see. So in some way, you've got to be able to capture what's going on. So there's a behavior you can see, something you can hear. In some way, you can really observe or know that that behavior is happening. Because if we can both see it, then we both know what we're talking about, right? So if I can say, I know how many, I was going to use a sound. I can see how many times they hit their sister. Oh yeah, I know what that looks like. And I can definitely count that, how many times that happens, and then begin to address it. So going into that is the measurable piece of it. So how do we know that it's getting any better? Is by measuring it. So that can be how many times it happens. So like how many times a child hits someone else. It can be how long it happens for. So any of you who have little infants in your home, small, very tiny babies, some of those babies cry a lot. And if we're not measuring that, sometimes the time between an hour and 10 minutes of crying and an hour and 2 minutes of crying we don't feel that, because an hour crying is a very long time when we're trying to console a little baby who's upset. So I think when we're measuring it, though, we can be like, okay, so it's a little bit better today. And when we're tired and when our defenses are low, it can be overwhelming. But I think measuring that also helps us as caregivers be like, all right, we're making change here. Or we can kind of track, oh, it was great these 4 nights, but then this night was not good because it went back up. What's happening? So being able to measure that is really how we're able to demonstrate change. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just know when you're in the midst of the struggle, it doesn't feel like it's getting any better.
It does not.
So I think if there's some way to bring hope to the situation of even incremental progress, it's progress nonetheless, right? So I think as a parent, if you're like, all right, it's something you can hold on to, right? Yeah. And know that there are better days ahead, even though like today, tomorrow doesn't feel like that. I think that the measure part's key because it does give us an insight about the difference it's making. And I knew that Anjali would love the graph if I started slide.
I did. Makes me happy.
It does make
I like my data too. The other part of the measurable part we were talking about earlier, bedtime. So those who have any age child who doesn't want to go to bed, because it doesn't just have to be little, that can also be.
I live this life.
With a teenager and
both.
and a little. Yeah, bedtime's a tough time. So there's lots of random things that happen all of a sudden at bedtime. But one of the things we can look at is like how long from like if 8 o'clock's bedtime or 10 o'clock's bedtime, how long from that bedtime till the time they actually got into bed. So, because again, those are moments of struggle. At night, we're tired. We got to wash dishes and get ready for the next day and all those things. And it's just getting later and later and later. So being able to measure that stuff can help us all. I think be like, all right, we're getting somewhere. It might not be perfect, but we're getting closer to it. So measuring in whatever way we can measure that is something we want to be able to do. So something we can see or hear or touch, something we can measure in time, occurrences, different ways to measure things. And then the last one is that it's an action. So it should be something that happens. So we can't measure the absence of behavior. We actually have to measure that behavior that's occurring. So if it's something observable and measurable, it should be something that they're actually doing. So like we talked about hitting, we can count how many times a child hits. We can count how long a child cries. That's an action. We can count how many minutes that until they actually go into their bedroom. So whatever those things are that we want to capture the action piece of it.
All right. So 3 good things to remember, right, as we think
Mhm.
about behavior.
Mhm.
All right, set this up.
Yeah, so what we want to do, so think about these 3 things: observable, measurable, and an action. We're talking about behaviors. We're going to watch a very brief video clip here. So get ready to put your answers in the chat as well. Here, we're going to watch this very brief video clip, and we want you to tell us what you see. That's all I'm going to say about it. I'm not going to say anything on, because we want you to think about it in terms of the behavior, and then let's talk through what you saw and whether those things make sense or how we can define them better. So,
Okay, ready?
cool. Does that make sense? Sorry, I should open the chat so I can make sure people are on the same page. I don't know how to open the chat. There we go. Okay. Okay, we'll go. Okay, so we're ready. We're going to watch the video, and I gotta put it back in the thing, and then tell us what you guys are seeing.
Caleb, cool it. Okay, everyone, I need you to get your papers out from yesterday. Those need to be on your desk. Caleb, if you do not have yours out, that will be a 0 for this assignment. Caleb, I am not going to play these games with you today. Pick up the paper or go to the office. Pick it up. Caleb, I don't know what your problem is, but you will not be disruptive in my class. Do you understand what I'm saying?
What y'all looking at?
That's it. To the office. Now, out.
All right, there's my very brief video. Okay, so now it's back on you guys. So what did you see in that clip? Hostility by the teacher or the child? Honestly, an angry young man. He's having a tough time. He was agitated. He's angry. He's being singled out.
I like Miss Lewis.
He is having a tough time. Some TBRI language. I like it, Miss Lewis. I'm with you. He picked up the paper and she didn't say thank you.
Amen. I
I'm
know.
with you. Something's going on. Nothing to the teacher. The teacher did not ignore it. The teacher was a little bit on edge, wasn't she? She was a little bit
She was dysregulated.
she was. How disobedient. Okay. Good. Okay, so we got some more. So looking at these, what your answers, let's talk a little bit more about that. So a couple of people said angry, right? One of the other words we see a lot of is disrespectful, right? That is one of the most common things we talk about. But when we're talking about those things, let's think about the observable and measurable part of this. I have this being Miss Lewis. We got you, lady. We
Miss
got
Lewis
you.
is an expert in this. I love it.
So when we're talking about disobedience, or we're talking about disrespect, and we're talking about having a hard time, and we're talking about being angry, observable and measurable. So the words that we're talking about are typically like umbrella terms. So they are what we're seeing, but what we've got to be clear on, because if we're coming into that classroom, you tell me a child's being angry, I can probably pick up on what you're talking about. But someone said here, he went and picked up the paper. He did what she asked him to, right? So is that really being disobedient and disrespectful and angry, or is it not? So observable and measurable, thinking about what are the specific things that we saw him do. So one of the things he did, someone said he threw the paper, right? She told him to take out a paper and he threw it. That is observable. I saw him throw it. I could measure how many times he threw, or how many pieces of paper he threw, or how far he threw it, or who he threw it, whatever. We could measure that. It's an action. So see those, so when we're talking about that, it falls under the umbrella of being disrespectful or disobedient or angry, but it is defining exactly what that is. So teenagers are, oh, Miss Bradshaw, Miss Bradshaw. Yeah, so a lot of those things. So what else? Some of the other things he did. I'm trying to think. He rolled his eyes. I did see his eye rolling. So that would be another disrespectful thing. Because you can see him rolling his eyes. You can count how many times he rolled his eyes.
And even when he spoke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like he was saying something, right? That to me, it wasn't like he was upset or everyone else was looking at him, right? So,
So great. Miss Bradshaw, Miss Alvarez, exactly.
What's
So
looking at?
yeah, so he said, so we can say how many times did he have a verbal outburst, or did he talk out of turn, or however we want to call that behavior. Making sure that we're identifying, even like sitting down, he sat inappropriately, right? Or he
sat like shook the desk.
Yeah. So those sorts of things, because again, we can call it whatever we want. It's how we talk about the specific behaviors that are occurring. So again, if we're coming in, so if we're dealing with a student and you reach out to us, say, my son's having a really hard time in school, I'm not sure what's going on, but the teacher says he's angry and disrespectful. All right, and then we go in, I might say, well, I mean, he struggled a little bit following directions, but I mean, he sat down, he got up and went to the principal's office. Like, I don't think any of the things were too outside the box, but that's my lens. Your lens might be like, are you kidding me? He should have been sitting there. Everyone else had their paper out. They're all following direction. So it was way off the reservation. But if we can talk about it more specifically in terms of, all right, I see what's happening here. I see he refuses to take out his work and do it. He refuses to listen to the teacher. He's throwing things. He's disrupting the other students by talking to them or yelling out or talking back to her. Now I can be like, all right, so I saw a bunch of those happening in those 2 minutes. So let's talk about why that's happening. And someone said, it's probably something that has nothing to do with her because he walked in late. Something probably was happening. So when we're looking at it as a whole picture and looking at these things, then we can start to identify, all right, so maybe we have to set up something different for this young man and have his directions written out on his desk for him, or have her come quietly over to him instead of singling him out, whatever it might be. But now if we know what we're talking about, we have a better way to try to address it.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say one more thing, but I'll wait because I think you have it on the next slide.
Okay. All right. So when we're talking about behaviors, what's a good way to really identify if we're describing a behavior? So this is the exercise we just went through. So ask, what does it look like when my child is being angry or is being disobedient or is having a hard time? So what does that look like? Because that'll lead us back to the observable piece of it, right? So again, we get a lot of the anger, we get a lot of the disrespect. But I'm going to tell you again, so what would you consider disrespectful behavior?
So I think someone spitting at me, right?
I would fully agree that that would be more than
I think like talking back and yelling, right? I would say like if we're engaging in a conversation and they roll their eyes and stomp away and go in their room, I think that would be disrespectful. Things of that nature.
Yes. I think so. I would totally agree with spitting. What was the second one you said? I already forgot.
Rolling their eyes.
Well, yeah. So it's funny, the rolling your eyes things. I said, well, and it's probably because I'm guilty of doing this behavior myself occasionally. I think rolling your eyes is age typical. Sometimes I can see you don't like it, but I think a lot of our kids do that. And I understand it is considered disrespectful, but I think if I was dealing with a child that was eye rolling, I wouldn't address it in the same way because I was like, well, she's 14. That's what 14-year-olds do. That's what 4-year-olds do. But see, this is how it becomes an issue because now we're addressing a behavior differently because I didn't think it was being disrespectful and you feel like it's disrespectful. So again, if we are asking, what does it actually look like when they're disrespectful? Okay, eye rolling. I got it. That's something we're going to add in. The talking back. That's part of the list of disrespect. So have it for yourself what it looks like, but also if you have someone else you're working with. So again, another caregiver in a home, the teacher, a therapist, the case manager, ask them to also do the same thing. Because if we talk about disrespect, I say talking back, or when I'm trying to talk to them that they cut me off and start telling me and explain to me, I find that different. Or ignore, not answering when I'm asking. Those things are disrespectful. The eye rolling, I can take it or leave it. The walking off and slamming the door, I would agree with that too. But if we're defining it and now it's like, oh, that's how you see it. Oh, this is how I see it. Let's make sure we're on the same page. Then we can address it. And then writing it down. The writing it down is one, to make sure we're clear on it being observable and measurable, but two, to keep us in the moment of what the behavior is. Because when those instances happen, a lot of times they can be stressful for us. Someone said stressful, right? Teens are stressful. I think it's easy to get pulled into that moment because we're trying to figure out how to deal with it too. And we forget, like, shoot, I'm supposed to be dealing with this. This is the behavior. It helps, again, our perspective and our lens when we're dealing with the behavior. So when we write it out, one, we're like, all right, this is what I'm dealing with. But two, it helps us remember those things and even document it when we're dealing with it. So I think how we define that is everything. Can I give one quick
Sure.
example? Sorry. So one of the things I always think about with how we're defining it as a real measurable. There's a foster parent we worked with a very long time ago, and she, this was back in the day when we're right. So she reached out and shared with you that she was having issues with her 2.5-year-old who was placed in her home, who was having tantrums. Like, hey, like he's 2.5, like 2.5-year-olds. That's pretty age typical, nothing over the top, but like she asked for help, we're coming out, we're gonna help. And I think so I called her, I went out and talked to her. I was like, so talk to me. So Dave shared that you're concerned that I don't remember his name, the 2.5-year-old is having tantrums. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't happen very often, but it's starting to happen more frequently. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about how do we deal with that. I was like, before we go more into detail, can you just tell me what it looks like when he has a tantrum? And she's like, yeah, well, he'll cry and he'll drop to the floor. Again, very atypical for 2.5-year-olds. And she's like, but the thing that I'm super concerned with is he'll start to like slam his head really hard repeatedly on the tile floors. It's like, hold on, that is not a tantrum anymore, because all of a sudden that's a pretty significant and dangerous behavior. But if we didn't have that conversation, and I understand why she's like, Dave, we need help right now. If we didn't have that conversation about what that behavior looked like, I would have just assumed it was an age typical tantrum. Like, let's talk about it. Yes, he's probably having a hard time with the transition to your home and all that. But when we know that it's some pretty significant self-injury and could potentially do some harm to him, then we definitely need to address it more immediately in a more specific way. So again, asking what does it look like, I think is a great way to move forward with that.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll say is very quickly about this, which I always feel like is super helpful, is how often when the exercise doesn't happen and we go into a home and mom and dad will both say disrespect, but then you unpack it with dad, you unpack it with mom, they give you two different lists of things. Mm-hmm. So the triggering behavior for dad is totally different behavior than for mom. Mm-hmm. And what we begin to see is once we kind of talk through that, you know, dad's got capacity to manage the stuff that mom's just like, that just sets me off. Totally. And vice versa. And so that began right away within like one visit of the house, kind of talking through that, a plan of attack of like the verbal or the look from each of them to the other one of like, well, this is your thing. I'm out, you know, because you got more capacity to manage through the situation than I do because this is a trigger for me, right? So even just right now tonight, like having that conversation, kind of unpacking that gives you a strategy of like a plan of attack of how do we negotiate behaviors and have more success because I've got more tolerance for particular things than my wife might have.
Agree.
All right. So in the end, we're going to talk about behaviors communication, right? So what is the need? And I think we've laid out sort of physiologically what some of those things are. That our history, right, drives a lot of those things. But I think in the end, the part that we just want to emphasize for the group is just in the end to understand that behavior is a way that kids are communicating with this, right? And really our job is to try to understand it, gain some insight into what message is this child trying to send to me? And then one, how do I meet the need in the moment? But it also, is there a way for me to get out in front of this in the future? So if I can get a sense of what they're struggling with and why they're acting out, not just today getting it resolved, but tomorrow, what things and what measures, what structures can I put in place that maybe mitigate the issue that they're struggling with. And then over time, we're on a good trajectory to begin to reduce the frequency, duration, intensity of behaviors.
Absolutely. And I think that's, if we can catch it before it even starts, that's what we want. That we don't even want the behavior to happen, the inappropriate behavior. So I think, like you said, understanding what that need is. And if we're like, oh, I got it, now I know a better way to deal with this, so we don't even get to this spot. I think as we go through the next few months of these different things, we'll talk specifically about how do we look at those needs in different lenses, and then what do we do once we know what that need is.
All right, awesome.
We're doing all right.
So I do know the part that we're excited about in partnering with the Just in Time team is the ability to, over a series of months, right, to provide different workshops to dig in deeper on these topics. And so I know in January we're going to have the applied behavior analysis team come in and dig in a little bit deeper on specifically some strategies to mitigate and support behaviors, right, for our kids. I'm so excited about that. And I know in February, right, we have our OT team. They're going to come in, same thing, some strategies from that perspective of, again, how do we identify the need? How do we meet the need? So I know we're pretty excited about moving forward, about having a regular conversation with everybody about some opportunities to support, good parenting and to give some folks some practical tools and tips. Because in the end, I think a lot of us are scrambling, going in the toolbox, trying to figure that out. And we're excited to bring some folks to bear that can give some good answers, give some good insight. So Miss Laura, I don't know if there's were there questions in the chat, some things you want to hit
All
on?
right. Well, we have one question that came in, so I'm going to just present it this way. How do you know when it's time to pursue a behavioral intervention or occupational therapy?
Great question, Angie.
So typically what like the the standard response is, I shouldn't say that like that. The standard response is when it's interfering with their ability to function. So when it's interfering with their daily living, whatever that might be. So, but what we will say too, so that might be their inability to be successful in the classroom, like we saw in that video clip. It might be their inability to be successful in the home. So they're struggling to get along with their siblings or with the other children in the home, or to safely maintain in the home, or take them out in the community. That's a big one for folks when they're unable to participate in age typical things. They might need a little bit more support. That's a great time to get involved. I know for kids who are in school, a lot of times the team at school will share with you when it might be time to seek some additional intervention. But I think for us, if you are feeling like it is overwhelming and that you need some sort of support, absolutely, I think it's our contact information is here. You can reach out. We can give some suggestions. I know as we go through, it is a challenging thing. I think one of the tricky parts we see and caregivers share with us sometimes is they feel like it's time for some additional support, and they don't feel supported in that request. So I think we would just want to say we want to empower you. If you truly feel like your child is in need, continue to advocate for them in whatever arena it is. And sometimes I know with some of the folks, they'll go to their pediatrician, they'll be like, nah, he's fine, he'll catch up. I was just having this conversation with a parent yesterday. And they're like, no, he's fine. It's just, he's young, he'll figure it out and he'll learn. And so I think mom continued. And then it got to the point where the doctor was like, all right, you're right. Actually, we should have a little bit more intervention happening here, or a deeper assessment. So absolutely. That's, I don't know, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay.
All right, thanks, guys. That's great. Here's just kind of tacking on the previous question of when do you know that a higher intervention is needed based on their behavior? Like if their behaviors have increased or there's multiple diagnosis, like when do you step that up?
Yeah, I think particularly if a child's behavior is increased, we want to look at what's happening surrounding that. So it might be circumstantial. So I know for a lot of children we work with, there might be increases of behavior during certain circumstances. Visitations is often, but that's a very emotionally triggering thing too. So looking at, is it something happening like that we can understand and address, or is there something else that's going on? But I do think if it's continuing to increase, absolutely we want to seek out some sort of support or assistance. Again, remembering behavior is communication. So if our kids don't have the words to be able to express, or even if they do have words, being able to talk about what we're feeling when it's something that significant is hard for any of us. So I think if our kids don't have the words, sometimes we see it in their behavior. So I think this is where TBRI, I think, is a great intervention to really wrap around families to give that view and that lens.
Yeah, and I do think, Ms. Lewis, obviously a lot of scaffolding around that child, right? So like pre-visit, post-visit, like what are we doing to, I think in every way try to mitigate the impact, but undeniable impact all the same, right? That I can only imagine what a child goes through going through that situation. And and I think if you're a little person trying to understand all the decisions big people are making, tough stuff. And so my heart goes out to that child and to you. It's a big lift in parenting, Miss Lewis, for you to do that. And again, I think why foster parents are worth their weight in gold, right? It's the toughest job there is, no doubt.
Yes, definitely. This has been a wonderful presentation, and we'd just like to thank both David and Anjali and the entire Family Initiative organization. They are wonderful, their entire team, and we just appreciate the support and their willingness to provide this training to our caregivers. So just want to thank them and thank everybody for participating today. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you to everybody who joined us online today. And again, if anybody has any questions about the Just in Time Training Network, just shoot us an email, just in time. It's jitsupport@usf.edu. Okay, so with that, I'll say thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.